Thanks everyone who's just joined us. Welcome to our 2022 Vivli annual meeting. My name is Rebecca Lee. I'm our executive director, and I think we'll get started. I know some of you who have just joined us. It's great to see some familiar names as well as some new ones as well. Just a few logistics. Oh, sorry. A few logistics for today. This meeting will be recorded, and also please post your questions in the Q&A section as we go along. We'll respond to these in these sections as we'll have a Q&A for each of the segments during the meeting. We really have a great lineup for you. I'll be giving you a very short update now at the beginning of the meeting to tell you a look back over our last year, talk about some of our key outputs that we've had, and to provide you with some outlook and vision over the next year for Vivli. We'll then start in on our data sharing for COVID, reflect back on some best practices and current experience with our COVID panel. We'll then move on to Dr. Susan Gregorek, talking about NIH data sharing and policy changes that will kick in January of 2023. I know there have been a lot of questions about that, and I think that'll be a really interesting panel and discussion. We'll then look at data challenges that Vivli has been partnering in the area of type 1 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease with the Helmsley Charitable Trust and with ADDI. So those are two very different data challenges, one that's just kicked off and one that's just about to start. And then we'll all be able to participate in Next Steps in Discussion, a segment that hopefully all of you will unmute and turn on your cameras if you like, and participate in that segment at the very end. So in this segment, what I'd like to do next is really look forward to giving you a look back and a deeper dive into some of the trends that we've been seeing here at Vivli. A short update on where we've been and an update on some of our projects as well. So let me talk about our numbers today. So we've been sharing through our data contributors close to 7,000 clinical trials. That's the raw data that underpins clinical trials, what we call IPD, or individual participant level data. And those data are contributed by 44 institutional members that are members of Vivli. That has contributed, those data has led to 125 public disclosures or publications, and we'll delve a little bit deeper into the outputs as well as those public disclosures in just a few minutes. When we've looked into our user base, so the user base and the researchers, what we've been seeing is that's been shifting a bit more global. So since 2019, those users were primarily from the US, and that's still the case. So more than half of those users are based in the US. But we've been seeing a shift more towards the European countries and a shift into the Asian countries as well. So that's been slight and over the last 3 years or so that we've been tracking this. And we'll continue to see what our progress has been in terms of our global shift. What I'd like to do next is to bring you into our inventory and think a little bit about what our inventory looks like. This is the first time we've done really a deep dive into our inventory and look at what our researchers requesting and how that actually lines up. We asked some really interesting questions. Before I do this, I just want to remind you about the process. People, if you look at the bottom, people are searching for information in our inventory, making a request, and accessing that data, analyzing it, and disseminating it. So that's what we're going to be talking about over the next 5 minutes. So the questions that we asked were, what is that actually in the inventory? So we did a kind of deep dive inventory over our 7,000 trials. And what are researchers searching for? What are they actually requesting? And does that line up with the outputs? Is there a pattern that we can predict? So today I thought I would open up the vault a bit to show you exactly what's in the inventory, what people are interested in. So does that line up? And based on searching in the last few years, and I thought I would get all of you involved in this as well in kind of a fun way. So let's get started. We also will look at together, does this pattern we see now perhaps foreshadow what will happen in the next few years on what will be published? So let's unpack this a bit by diving deeper into our trials inventory. We have almost 7,000 clinical studies or trials in our inventory. And what we had was a group at Columbia who helped us do this, look and put them in bins. So each trial was tagged by therapeutic area. Each trial could be having multiple tags. So something could be tagged as, for example, endocrinology and cardiology. And there were overall 28 therapeutic areas that were tagged. The top ones are shown here in circles. There's an additional 17 therapeutic areas that comprise 1% to 3% each. So just keep an eye on these. If you're particularly interested in the therapeutic area, you can follow the color coding in the next few slides. For example, oncology is always going to be yellow. Infectious disease is this kind of aqua color. Metabolism or endocrinology is always going to be a certain color. You can follow those. And then some interesting ones, maybe rheumatology and gastroenterology, so you'll notice those, and I'll show you a few trends on that as we go through. Of course, our biggies are pulmonology, infectious disease, and oncology are what's big in our inventory and being tagged. So I thought we could keep this interactive, is ask you to give me an idea of what you think is the top search term in January of 2020. We've put this link in the chat, and maybe you can take a stab at using the poll everywhere. So look at the link in the chat and come back, and we should start seeing what you all think was the top search term in Vivli in January of 2020 in our database. So I'm seeing COVID come up as one of the terms. Okay, that's a little interesting. Cancer, coronavirus, SARS, oncology, virology, obesity, cancer, mental health, SARS, COVID-19, obesity, oncology, colitis, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, pulmonary. Okay. Great. Okay, so heart, IPF, this is interesting. Okay, I'll just wait one more minute and see if this continues to change. Okay, great. So let's take a look at actually what was the, so now oncology is coming up and probably taking a, oh, black fungus, that's an interesting one, and heart disease. Okay, so we have, I think our front runners are COVID, oncology, and cancer. So we can see what actually was picked as the number one pick. And so what we are seeing here is what researchers were actually looking for in January of 2020, and I think COVID and oncology were really I know COVID was really just starting in January of 2020, is cancer and diabetes. And we had certainly a lot of oncology in that case. I think neurology, depression, and pulmonary. So those were really our top searches in January of 2020. Interestingly, I think COVID was just becoming a thing in January, but we really didn't have that as a top search, which is interesting. And so let's follow this line of thinking into what was being requested, because I think we would think about that being a request type, what actually followed as requests, like proposals coming into Vivli. So that is not surprising that oncology was our most requested, was some of our most requested numbers. So we had 30% of our requests came in the oncology space, about 13% in neurology, and then so on, psychiatry, rheumatology, and cardiovascular disease, infectious disease methods, and gastro. So that's where our requests came in. But I'd like to now take you into where actually were things published. The publications come in about the 12 to 18 month time frame after a request comes in, but on average about 15 to 18 months after a proposal is submitted. So here are where our publications come in. And interestingly, we see, of course, a lot of publications come in oncology, but really rheumatology and gastroenterology are overrepresented here. And here are our publications. So then let's just do this really quickly now, is what do we think the top search term is in Vivli in 2022? Now that you're practiced, let's just see what we think this is going to be. So today, what do people think is the top search term in 2022? And I think we can also make some predictions about what might be published here. Okay, COVID. Any other guesses? COVID-19, mental health, oncology. Polio. Okay, that's great. Depression. Oh, monkeypox. Interesting. Long COVID. Okay. Alzheimer's disease, Ebola. RSV, colitis. Okay. Okay, so I think there's been a lot of COVID and oncology, but also a couple really interesting other ones as well. So in our top 2022 searchers are indeed COVID, and then oncology has been following. So we would anticipate 1 to 2 years from now, if these are requested, perhaps the publications would follow. So we have a number of course, oncology searches as well. Diabetes is a big one. Again, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, and Crohn's disease. So these are our top searches. So I just want to go through the next few slides very quickly to keep us on time. So beyond publications, what we did was we also coded our outcomes because we think outcomes could be beyond publications and really important to us. So we see that what we decided to do is we thought about outcomes beyond publications, and we saw that there were 6 outcomes we coded to. First of all, we looked at coding we saw that there were tools, so everything from web-based tools to patient care decision tools was an outcome that was a possibility. Designing future trials or trial protocols was also an outcome that we thought was 14%. So that was really interesting. When I was a trialist, I wish that there were this type of data around. So 14% of these were coded to trial protocols, algorithms. There's about 8%, so machine learning and AI outcomes, clinical guidelines, which of course are so important. 4% of all of these requests were coded to clinical guidelines, informing a regulatory decision, and then funding or grant applications. I'm actually surprised it's only 1%, but that's what it looks like. So I thought this was a really interesting way of actually capturing beyond our publications what other outcomes are coming out of Vivli. I think we're really proud of this, and we'll continue to do that. So our next segment is moving into talking about COVID. I thought I'd give a little bit of context for where we are for our next discussion. And clearly we saw that you all thought COVID was our top search term. That is indeed what researchers are interested in the Vivli platform. Right now we have a little over 50 studies that are listed for COVID. 12 proposals have been submitted so far, and 13 proposals have been submitted so far, 12 have been approved, with 2 publications that have emanated out of that work. We have an additional about 9 that are in draft, so we would anticipate some of those, a proportion would at least come through. And so that's really exciting, and perhaps we would see in about 15 to 18 months, some of these would come through as publications as we've